Hello. Before we get started with episode 9 of the Alone podcast, we have a review to read from Apple Podcasts. This comes from Steph Dula, and Steph Dula says, "The only thing I would change about this show is that I wouldn't have to wait a week for the next one. It's fantastic. I've loved getting to know each of the contestants on a deeper level." So thank you, Steph Dula, for leaving that review. Thank you for having my first quote-unquote critical review be a funny one. I'm right there with you. I wish that I could have more than one of these a week because it's a privilege, really, to get to have these conversations and then incredible to be able to share them with all of you. So thanks again, Steph Dula, for that review. And thank you to everyone who is taking time out of your lives to listen to the show and to get to know these wonderful people on a deeper level. As well, thank you to all of you who have taken the time to leave a review and a comment on Apple Podcasts. If you haven't done so and you're interested, I invite you to take the time to do so. Without any further waiting, let's go ahead and get right in to episode 9 of the Alone podcast. Hello and welcome to episode 9 of the Alone podcast. Tonight's guest is Callie North. Callie was a participant on season 3 of Alone in Patagonia. For me, I guess I don't need to say too much. I think most people are fairly familiar with Callie and with her experience on the show and who she is. So Callie, thank you for coming on and welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Sam. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, of course. And for about half the episodes, I've started off with kind of an easier question. And so tonight, I was watching kind of back through your clips on the show, just making sure that I remembered everything and made sure there wasn't anything I wanted to talk about or any, just jogging my memory, I guess. And we were watching with our 6-year-old, and she was watching you build your shelter and was just blown away. Like, "Dad, did she make that?" "Yes, she is. You're watching her make it right now." And she was all excited about that, and she looked and was asking me, "I wonder how much practice it took her to be able to make that shelter." And I looked at her and said, "Well, I'm talking to her tonight. Would you like me to ask her that question?" So, Callie, the first question for you tonight comes from my 6-year-old Sarah, and she's wondering how much practice it took to be able to build a shelter like you did in Patagonia.
Yeah, it's a great question, Sarah. And I think everybody's approach to building their shelter is different. For me, I definitely went in with a clear plan. I had help from a couple friends. Certainly some of the credit needs to go to Lucas from season 1, Lucas Miller, who's a friend of mine. And he gave me some of the basic idea for the shelter. And then Nathan, who was on a later season 6, lives on the island where I live and is a friend of mine, and he helped me do a lot of prep. So I had to do a lot of kind of crunching of some skills, and he supported me in that. And so we set up the shelter on my land, not fully, but got kind of a basic overview so I could go in and have as much clarity about what I wanted to do. So I still have the skeleton of my original practice shelter set up on our property.
Oh, that's super cool. It's cool to hear how kind of the friendships and the camaraderie, has kind of started people's journeys on the show and how it's continued after the show. It's just neat to hear kind of these little things about how tight the group is and how helpful and supportive everyone is, I think for me, I try and use the word participant as much as I possibly can instead of contestant, because it seems like it's more, everyone is participating in a thing kind of together as opposed to competing against one another.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a really supportive group, and it's such an incredibly unique experience that there certainly is a bonding over all sorts of aspects of the show, including, shared trauma, shared joy. And yeah, it's a participant as well, because for everybody going out there, I mean, it's different for everybody. Some people it's a contest, some people it's just an experience. So
yeah. Well, I think to get started on our next question is, for me, as I've kind of looked at your stuff and just followed who you are and what you're doing today, you have a very close connection to the earth and to the land. So I guess I'm just curious of where that started for you, and you're living, it's kind of hard to say like an alternative lifestyle or a not common one, because really that's where we all came from. But when did you decide that the typical deal wasn't for you?
Yeah, I grew up on the island where I live. Called it's currently called Lopez Island. It's unceded Coast Salish territory off the coast of Washington State, and I moved back when I was 21. But my path to leading me back, which it took me around the world. But I would say before that, growing up, we always lived a more land-based lifestyle, but not as heavily as I do now. So, we always had gardens and grew some amount of our food. And there's a lot of elements of living with the land that were integrated, having a wood stove, using plant medicine, things now that I look back on as being a little bit more of a unique experience. But it wasn't until I returned back from 4 years of traveling that I moved into the cabin where I live now and have lived for 12 years, and really deepened in my connection with it when I found the cabin. And it was my grandparents' land. They never lived there, but it was just a small off-grid cabin that they had on 20 acres that they would come up in the summer to visit my mom and aunt and our family up there. But it was the amenity was nothing. There was absolutely no water, no electricity, just really bare bones, no garden, no nothing. It was just a tiny cabin plopped in the middle of the forest. And so when I moved up there, that experience was completely brand new for me. I had never, I had done lots of camping and time out in the wilderness, but I'd never lived like that. And so it was a huge adjustment, certain aspects in particular. Like I remember when I first moved up, really struggling with the darkness, and how, that was something that really stood out to me, was how living without electricity, especially as I went into the winter months, because back then I was just using candles. So that was certainly an experience that really threw me into the lifestyle of land-based living. And over the years, I really attribute my relationship with that piece of land in particular as being, the catalyst and this huge teacher for me in reconnecting and connecting deeper with land-based living. And over the years, we've put in gardens. And once Randy, my partner, who was also on the show, moved onto the land, the amenity situation went through the roof. So now we have a super dialed solar system, gravity feed water from the pond. And for, the better part of a decade, I lived with very, very little, which was the kind of basis of my skill set for going on alone. It wasn't the bushcraft stuff at all. Like I said in the beginning, I had to do a lot of crunching of the basic skills, and named me with that because my skill set was more just being comfortable living by myself in the woods and using my creativity and ingenuity to problem solve.
Well, and ironically, I think the living alone by oneself in the woods tends to be one of the big factors of alone. So you had lots of perfect preparation for the part that is the hardest to prepare for, which is pretty cool and unique for you. You mentioned that you had traveled the world for, it sounds like a period of time, a couple of 4 years, it sounded like, right?
Yeah, that was kind of a 4-year stretch, but I've had a lot. I was really privileged to go to alternative private schools my whole life. My mom she was a single mom, but she prioritized our schooling and did everything she could to make that happen for us. And so I went to alternative private schools, including my middle and high school was a school that was based around international travel. And so the third quarter of every year was taken to go on trips. When you're younger, it was more hiking, backpacking trips. And then once you got into high school, it was doing trips abroad. So that kind of set the tone for my love of travel. And then after high school, I left and did 4 years. And then as an adult, I've been able to take a lot of trips too. And travel has really shaped my experience as a person.
And so I guess as I'm hearing those, it sounds like even deeper, your mom, she sounds like an awesome person and sounds like someone who has really tried to provide experiences and expand horizons, and so it sounds like a lot of where you are today comes from her. Can you maybe talk about her a little bit and what her philosophies are, and what helped her to decide to put you in certain types of schools, and to be as supportive and teach you these things? I'm assuming, like, does the plant medicine and that connection come from her as well?
Yeah, my mom is a wonderful person, and it really comes from her family. My grandparents, her parents, were just unbelievably remarkable people, and really totally unique for their time. They both were explorers and adventurers, and began traveling and living abroad um, together with their 5 children from a super young age. And they lived on every continent. They were mountain climbers. They were hired explorers to go up to the Arctic and things like that. My grandma's a mountain climber and explorer, and my grandma was tiring for him to come back, so she just started joining him on his adventures. So we grew up with a very adventurous family, and so my mom certainly, along with our big and close family, helped instill those principles of adventure. And our family motto is really "Don't wait." That's the kind of sums it up. Just the idea of whatever it is whatever it is you want to do in life, don't wait for the perfect day, the perfect weather, for all the cards to align. Just go out and do it. And so I really took after my grandparents' love of adventure and unusual experiences.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I mean, obviously you live a wonderful life, and I think a lot of people, would think it's just a life of nothing but adventure. I'm sure it's a life of a lot of really hard work, and a lot of challenge, but it's great that your parents, and really for you, looking at your grandparents, that you followed their example as well, which is something I kind of want to get into. When you talk about your grandparents, as we kind of were looking through some of your stuff, it seems like your history, I think Scottish and Irish, kind of combined there, is something that's really important to you and to your family, and has shaped a lot of who you are. Can you talk some more about that as well?
Yeah, so we were raised with a very very huge Scottish influence. My grandpa is his surname is Dougal, and he was very, very proud of his Scottish heritage, um, and that played a pretty significant role in our family. And we, especially my mom, my grandma, and I, just have such a strong connection to Scotland. My grandparents lived in Scotland for a year, and then ended up going back every year for 15 years for um, part of the year, around 4 months every year. So we went and visited them. And then as an adult, I've gone back. And for my mom, my grandma, and I, we have all just hold a really deep spiritual connection to the land there. And so, I was raised with that as kind of being the main heritage ancestral piece. But as I got older, really started deepening in with my Irish connection. And I lived in Ireland for a year and was able to go back to some of our ancestral lands. My grandmother's grandmother came over during the potato famine from Ireland. And so our direct maternal line comes from Donegal in Ireland. And so it's been fun getting to explore other sides of my heritage beyond the Scottish side, though I do still hold that side very dear.
Kind of an interesting mix to to have, and hopefully the two sides don't meet each other in the wrong time. Is that kind of how that goes?
Yeah, I mean, it's all, I think it's all
We're all good
it's all
now.
good. I mean, I think it's more the English that has which I certainly have quite a bit of too, but that's the side that's more controversial.
Well, I'm right there with you. So talking that as we were looking through some of your stuff as well, we saw videos of you and your brother dancing jigs, and you're very musical, and you're using obviously some of that ancestry to influence your music today. But I mean, incredibly artistic and musical, singing instruments. So where does that come, and what kind of a role does that play in your life? I mean, certainly on the show, we saw that instruments and music were important there. But where did that come from? Are you self-taught, or did you learn that in school?
That also came from my family on my mom's side. My grandparents, they were a part of the peace movement in the 40s and 50s, and up through my grandma worked for the World Against War Council all the way up, for the bulk of her life. But the root of that movement in the 40s, 50s was the folk music era. Pete Seeger, the Weavers, Lee Hayes, that era of music that really set the stage for a lot of artists to follow, like Bob Dylan, Woody Guthrie, that then were inspirations for the music movements of the 60s, 70s, Crosby, Stills and Nash, and so on. But my grandparents had a very strong relationship to the early folk music, and so our family, of which I have a very large extended family that all lives in the Seattle area, we gather many times a year, and music was a fundamental piece of those gatherings, still is. My grandma actually just passed away a couple of weeks ago at 96, and at her passing, at both her and my grandpa's passing, our family gathered and singing the old songs. And but so that was the foundation. And my mom's a musician and studied music, so it's always just been a part of the deeper fabric of my life.
Yeah, it's obviously the song, your Patagonia song that you sang, and then I think it was you, your mom, and your brother had redone. You're really good. Like you and your family, you sound really good when you sing, and your instruments and your playing. I'm assuming, did you do more of that on Alone than hit the camera, and was that something that kind of helped you through your time there, or did it play the exact role that they showed on the show, which wasn't a ton of time?
Well, first, thank you. I appreciate that compliment. And yeah, I mean, it was huge. I think for a lot of us out there, the singing, I mean, the being able to talk out loud. I was just listening to Mike Lowe's interview, and he was sharing his experience of being able to talk out loud with his God, and how just helpful that was. And I mean, I felt the same with being able to talk out loud, even just to myself. But the singing was so crucial. And yeah, I wrote just countless songs, and also just, sang really familiar songs that just helped keep the spirits up. And then once I made my instrument, I was able to play that and write a lot of music on that. And yeah, they showed they're only able to show so little.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was definitely a huge piece.
So are we going to have a Made in Patagonia album coming out at some point with all your songs you wrote down there?
Oh, I don't know. But maybe someday.
Yeah. You should
add it to the list.
Yeah, right. One of these days when you have time and all of your spare time, you can go ahead and get that album recorded.
It would be a very niche album for Alone fans.
What kind of stuff were you singing and writing about?
Oh, I mean, everything from goofy to serious and cheesy. And I remember on I think it was on the latest season, on season 8, Biko was talking about how he had talked about with his partner about how they they would look at the moon and know they were looking at the same moon. And I had this very cheesy song that I would sing, and see if I can bring it back. But it was just about that same thing. I would think about, like, it was like, it's the same moon, it's the same moon, it's the same moon but different stars. I'm thinking of you wherever you are. And so just, whatever little ditties, but I totally forgot about that song till Biko had I'm pretty sure it was Biko had brought up his experience of talking about looking at the same moon.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that was Biko, and it's funny. I was going to lead off with a question of if you and Biko were going to go on tour together at any point in time, but then obviously Sarah came up with a much better introductory question. Maybe you can.
Well, I'm not really connected with Biko. I mean, we've messaged a little bit on Instagram, but both Randy and I, we just loved Biko. We only get, like, I have yet to kind of fully watch any season in its entirety. I feel like we end up watching like the first 4 episodes and then we watch the finale for whatever reason. But Randy and I were both just obsessed with Biko. So Randy wants to do his own spin-off show with Biko, and I don't even know. But yes, because we're Biko fans.
There you go. Well, there you go, Biko. They are fans, and get in touch with Randy. Apparently, everyone, you heard it here first. So we've thrown that name out there a few times. So I guess it's probably time to mention Randy and kind of go into that if we can. So Randy was on. Man, I haven't done my homework. Was it 1 and 4?
He was on season 2 and 5.
2 and 5. Okay. So
yeah.
Randy was from seasons 2 and 5. And yeah, Randy and Callie, you guys have a child together now. And do you want to talk about how that happened? I mean, not the child, obviously, but you and Randy.
So yeah, Randy, I mean, it's just, the Alone experience has, and I've said it so many times, but it was truly the greatest gift of my life. And it set my life on the course it's on now, which, I mean, I'm still living in the same place and kind of doing the same thing on a more rudimentary level, but everything else that's come into my life since then has just been so incredible, and including Randy and our baby. And so Randy, so season 2 aired. There was maybe 1 or 2 episodes we saw of season 2 before we went out to Patagonia. I think we even watched as a group down in Patagonia. We watched like maybe the 3rd episode or something before we went out. And so I didn't, Randy was kind of in my, I just, we didn't connect until after my season aired. And then we were just, sent a few messages back and forth on Instagram, but it was after season 5 aired that I was watching season 5 with my mom and a very close friend of mine who supported me in my shop through my Alone experience. And we were watching, and then Randy came on the screen, and he was like, he was like in his underwear building his log cabin.
I was not expecting this to go this direction.
And my friend turns to me and was like, wow, that guy's a hunk. And I was like, that guy is a hunk. And so then I wrote him, I think that night, and I literally just wrote him and said, you are a hunk. Yeah. And then I said something, dead serious, something like, if you ever want to move up to the woods and make survival babies, let me know.
We were just not messing around.
Yes, I always say, like the poet Rumi says, you must ask for what you really want. So, and at that point, I was in a place of really ready to draw in a partner, um, and so, and he wrote back and was like, haha, making me blush, and then basically it was just it was all history from there. But what's pretty cool about the whole thing is when I was out on a loan, I was really in a clear space about wanting, I mean, I've always known I've wanted to have a family. And a part of my time on a loan was really about, getting into a space of being able to do a lot of personal work, seeing the kind of work that I wanted to do to be able to be in a really clear space to draw in the partner that I wanted to draw in, and looking at past relationship patterns and some of my deeper wounding, things like that I just wanted to that I had been on a path of working on, but wanting to get clear on and really do some clearing. And then out there, I was in kind of a constant state of ceremony, but I did some different personal ceremonies. And one of the ceremonies I did was really calling upon my future children to help draw in the person that they wanted me to have kids with. So calling on their spirits to help me draw in. And when I was out there, I had I mean, the dreams that you have out there are really wild. Often they're like food dreams, but sometimes there'd be something more profound. And I had this dream where I was standing on like the bank of the river where at my spot, and our yellow brick, which was like our GPS tracker that they give us, that they check in with like pre-programmed messages. And every morning and evening, that's how they kind of track that you're still alive. They send you a message, and you have to respond with a pre-programmed message like, okay. And it makes this just like really terrible beeping noise that
Yes.
just gets
I
embedded in your psyche. And so
It's funny when you said that, I was like, oh my goodness, I remember that from some of the episodes. There's like this heinous, terrible noise. Anyways, continue.
yeah. And so it's like, and when you first are out there, it's like I would be hallucinating that I'd be hearing the beeping. But so in this dream, I'm standing by the river, and my GPS tracker goes off, and it's making the beeping noise. And I read on the screen, and I'm knowing it's coming from some, like, my future partner. And it says, someday when the time is right, we will have a beautiful daughter. And I mean, it makes me choke up, because now it was 2 years after I came back from a loan that um, Randy and I got together, and then it was 3 years after that we had our daughter River, and she was born this summer at our home, and she's just incredible, and just such a such a blessing for both of us. And yeah, and so it's a really great origin story for us and for her, and get to share in that whole alone experience. And
Yeah,
yeah, so
that's super neat. And don't mind, don't feel bad about choking up, because I'm over here like
oh yeah,
do it the same. I mentioned in one of the conversations, like, I wear my emotions on my sleeve, and it's funny, I guess, for those out there that are thinking about that experience. So for me, Michelle and I, we had kind of a similar experience. And not to get too personal in my life, because we're all here for Callie and everyone else, but just to kind of, I guess, to share for those out there that that experience, I think that's fantastic. Because for me, I had gone on a 2-year spiritual journey, and was doing spiritual service basically for 2 years, and my time was starting to wrap up, and I knew I was going to be coming home, and I was so involved in what I was doing that I wasn't even thinking about what was happening in the future, right? Or future family or anything else. And I was just hanging out in my house or my place one day, and just had this very like super clear, the person you will end up with is, meets X, Y, and Z character traits, and like this is basically who they are. I was like, wow, that's wasn't looking for that, but okay. um and of course that kind of puts one to
I love
ponder
that.
of like, okay, so it was basically I knew who the person was. It was like this person already, you've already met, they're already in your life. And then all these different things of like basically exactly who this person was, and I for the life of me couldn't figure it out. I was like, man, what is going on here? And then I don't even know, 9 months later, Michelle and I reconnected, and it was very quickly like, oh my goodness. And so I hear your story, and I feel your story, because it was kind of similar in a way of just that knowing of, I don't know, it's you can't describe the experience, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, and all the steps in our lives that lead us up to that point. I mean, it's like you could trace back to the beginning, but I think about I mean, for me, um, the whole experience of signing up for a loan, it was just everything was so, for lack of a better word, cosmically timed, and in such alignment with all these little pieces that got us there. And and I don't know if it was for any one specific outcome, if it was to bring our children into the world, or just to, but it's amazing how you can look back and trace the steps that got us to this point.
Yeah, yeah, for us, we have kind of a couple of those as well. I mean, with different school things, and parents of friends force, it's just a it's a long funny story. But it is kind of weird when you stop and look at your life, and you have some seminal experience in your life, and then when you start tracking back all of the decisions that, not even decisions, all of the things that had to happen in your life to make that one moment happen, and then to think that there's other players involved on the other side. It's pretty mind blowing when you stop and do that exercise. Um, there's yeah, I don't know. I can't even describe it, but anyways, I wanted to talk about how obviously your life has changed dramatically since you've been home from alone from Patagonia. But can you talk a little bit about how that experience changed your life? Obviously, we've just talked about how you were there, and you did a lot of finding of yourself and those types of things. But can you talk about how your maybe experience with the land and your viewpoints on life have changed and been altered by your time being alone and being that dependent on the earth for your existence?
Yeah, it was I mean, that experience of not only just relying on yourself, and the land for all your needs. I mean, it's a cooperative experience. It's not just, you have to really put all your faith in the land, and hope that you will receive the nourishment and the protection and the everything that you need. And that was a really, that was something that came intuitively for me because of my experience of living close to the land in my cabin. But it was a whole other experience to do it with just minimal tools, and in a new environment, and not having any backup beyond having to leave the experience. So there was a number of kind of tests that I went through out there that with the land, including like dealing with my spider bites and having to rely on plant medicine. And but ultimately it just affirmed for me what I know in my heart of hearts, which is we are a part of the earth, and the land, and nature, and not separate from it. And when we find ourselves in a space of working with the land and not against it, a lot of, wonderful things come from it. And I felt very cared for, very safe, very protected. I felt like I received, gifts in the form of food and medicine and awarenesses. And so, there was a lot of challenges that came from the experience, but ultimately it's, it was just such a gift. And, I think one of the biggest takeaways for me through that experience, I had to shed a lot. It was a lot of ego death, and I had to let go of a lot of attachment, in particular to winning. I went in with just such a huge pressure, self-imposed pressure to win, and it was hindering my ability to have the experience that I felt like I ultimately went out there to have, even if I wasn't as conscious of it. And so the moment I was able to let go of that attachment, I was able to really kind of shift the way that I showed up, spiritually and emotionally. And so one of my biggest takeaways from that whole experience was the gift of letting go of attachment to outcomes and expectations. And I have carried that with me so through so many things, beyond that time. Another huge gift that came, just on the heels of my grandma passing here, I one of the biggest awarenesses that I got out of that was everything becomes so clear focused. And I had so much sadness and regret around how many times I had not been present with the people I love, even when I was in their presence, how I was distracted, or I chose to, like I had this memory of being on the beach with my grandma on Kauai, and she was sitting on the beach and by herself, and I was sitting up on a table, and I was just really preoccupied with some, unimportant thought that I wanted to write in my journal. And instead of going and sitting with her on the beach, I decided to sit and write in my journal. And out there on alone, it was, something that might not have had that much impact, when you have all these other distractions to think about. But out there, it was so crystal clear. I just remember weeping, sobbing, that I didn't go down and sit with her. And so I made this commitment when I came back to change the way that I was present with the people the people I love most, and the people whose time felt limited to me. So my niece and nephew, my brother's kids, who I'm really close with, who were young kids, they're kind of preteens now, but, and then my grandma. And so for the last 5 years, I made a commitment to just be as present with them and my grandma, and was able to just, kind of become somewhat of a caretaker for her. And then when I was with her, just be super present. And I know I keep using that word, but that's the only way to really describe it. And because of that, we were just with her at her passing. River and I were by her side. And I knew that after she went, I wouldn't carry, it's still from a somewhat of a selfish place, but I felt like I could carry, on knowing that I had been as present with her as I could possibly be. And it was, of course, a gift to her too, to be able to have us around, in those final years. So
Yeah, that's
sorry, that was a long tangent, but
no, that's not a tangent at all. I said it to Larry, and I'll say it to you. I asked you guys to come on to hear those tangents, right? I think that's what people are so interested in. But what a huge blessing to come from that experience of really a painful experience, right? I think it's an acquired taste to enjoy, or to appreciate, I guess I should say is probably the better word, but it's a developed thing to be able to appreciate that introspection, or those times when when our maybe shortcomings or not even a shortcoming, but where something is shown to us that we could do differently. So how a blessing for you to experience that. And then, now when you look back on the last 5 years with your grandmother, obviously it's still sad, but it seems like you were able to get what you needed with her in that time because of that pain that you experienced as you got to see those aspects. I don't know if I'm describing
Totally.
that well for people,
Yeah. And it was,
but I don't know, that's really, I'm going to say neat. That's neat that something so good for you was able to come from that pain that you felt.
totally. And I think that that's one of the, and good for all of us. It was, it was a gift for my grandmother and my mom and all of us to be so close in this time. Um, and, and it is, I think that's one of the parts of the experience of Alone that is very difficult to convey through the television. And you see that come up in the form of, a lot of online judgment, things like that, when they, seeing people having these emotional experiences that seem, often those experiences come with the longevity of being out there, or even, it can show up right away. I mean, like with Mike's interview, talking about how his heart pains of missing his wife, that showed up, kind of unexpectedly right away when he was out there. And you just don't know what's going to come up for you. And, for some people, um, it it's profoundly life changing. And I think for all of us, the awarenesses that we have out there are very life changing. And if we can integrate those experiences, they can have lasting impacts. Sometimes they're too much, and they get shut down or they don't want to be looked at. But if they can be integrated back into our lives, they can change the future for us and those we love.
Yeah, it's funny. It's hard to see that, right? When you're in the middle of it, when you're in the thick of it. But it's neat how at some point those experiences come back and how they're beneficial and how we can see, okay, I can do this. You mentioned mean people online. We won't spend too much time there, but it's funny. Actually, won't spend any time there really, but it's funny for me as I've gotten to talk to so many of you now. And I'm kind of a funny person. For me, I have one conversation with someone, I'm like, oh yeah, that's my friend, and so I walk around and I view like everyone in the world as my friends. And so for me, I feel like, hey, I've got a handful of friends that were on the Alone show. That's pretty cool. But I find myself, when I see, even still, I don't understand why people are still like so critical online. But I find myself having like an emotional response of like, hey, that's my friend you're talking about there. They're awesome. Like, you should get to know them and you'll realize that you're way off base. So I can't imagine what that's like being on your end. For me, I'm just, I talk to you guys for an hour and then I'm like already bristling and defensive when I see people.
Oh, I know.
Being
and
rude.
it's some people do a lot better with it. Some people are a lot more water off the back about it. Certainly people who had experiences before going on the show, like say people who were on YouTube or things like that had experiences with trolls. But I found it and still find it difficult, in particular, just like you're saying. I mean, I struggled with it with myself when it first came out, especially because our season aired just a few months after we got back. So it's so raw and still in such a space of processing my own journey, that when it came out and having to deal with people's responses, good and bad, it was just so overwhelming. But now I feel, the defensiveness of other contestants come out. And I know Megan talked about that a little bit, and we've gotten, there's like, we both try to do our best to avoid it, but sometimes we find ourselves coming to the defense because, and we all know it's like, it's of course it's not personal.
Yeah, it can't be.
How could it be? People,
Yeah.
It can't be. And people just, people troll every anything that they can. And it certainly is a reflection of where that person is at in their own experience. But it's a whole thing, and one that you can't prepare yourself for, because even though people say, oh, well, you signed up to be on TV and that's what comes along with the territory. It's like the experience of being on TV is entirely abstract until you've had it. And then it's this whole thing, and you just can't know what that experience is until you've been in it, and nobody can prepare you for it. And especially when you are putting something out there that's so personal and so raw and so vulnerable, it is difficult to, and I'm a super curious person, so I wanted to read all the good and the bad that people had to say, and eventually I just had to stop because I just got too overwhelmed.
Yeah, when Megan mentioned that there were people saying that the women of season 3 had like the easiest locations, it's like, man, how do you not just like, I don't know, I don't understand people, Callie, I just don't. But I wanted to point this out too. So Biko, trolls are great. Not all trolls are a bad thing.
Yes.
Well, we'll let Biko set the record straight on that here in a couple weeks, hopefully. But
yes,
I want to kind of backtrack. We're gonna rewind here like 10 minutes. You had mentioned, as you were talking about that experience of right before you were talking about that experience of remembering that moment in Hawaii with your grandmother and writing in your journal, which, by the way, writing in your journal, that's a fantastic thing to do. So it's not like you were, messing around on your phone on Facebook or something. But you had mentioned that there were, other challenges that kind of came from your experience on the show. Is that something that you can kind of expand on a little bit?
Yeah, certainly the most challenging piece of the experience for me was the integration back in. Megan mentioned it, but we didn't have any refeeding program at all. They a lot because of our season, and kind of what a shit show it was, us coming back. They have, it's night and day, and I really I'm grateful to production for changing it, but it doesn't it doesn't mitigate what we went through, which was really traumatic, in terms of having just absolutely no support when we came out of the field in terms of food. They did eventually like fly a psychologist down to be with us, because I had like a full panic attack that was really brought on by lack of sleep and like too much sugar. But when we came out, they took, like, the day I came out, this is 2.5 months of being in the wilderness alone. I lost almost 30 pounds off a not very large frame, and probably taking in 500 calories a day. Took me straight to a grocery store, told me to get anything I wanted.
Oh no.
And then dropped me off alone in this large kind of, like, we were just in the middle of nowhere. So but it was on this billionaire's property. So there's this old, like, it literally was like the Shining house. It was this ginormous kind of, I don't even know how to describe it. It had this large center room with these wings that had like rooms in it. So they dropped me off by myself with all this food and just left. And they came back the next day to check on us. And then I ended up, that next day, so the day after, I just gorged to the point of throwing up. And there's no control and over what you're eating at all. It doesn't matter if you have, and I felt like I went in with, knowledge of, oh yes, and this is what you'd want to eat when you come back. And that's out the window. The survival brain is on and you're gorging yourself. And then the next day I was in a minor car accident with one of the production assistant who was driving. It was just, the whole thing was just a disaster. And I was very, very upset because I left on this totally high note. Felt like I was on top of the world, and I had completed something, this like huge journey. And then I came back and I felt like all of it, all the doors of awareness, everything just like shut down, like a vault door just slammed shut. And I was thrown into this just very difficult integration period. And and it was kind of awful. But ultimately, that was a part of the experience as well, and has helped. It Production was really great about listening to feedback, and of course, nothing that they did was intentional. It was just really came out of a lack of kind of common sense about what somebody would need in that experience. And our season went on longer than previous seasons, and so it just was, so since then they changed it and made and really made it a lot better of a integration experience for people. And of course, just going through any hard experience has strengthened my resilience, and I've been able to learn from that as well. And so I don't have any, I did, but I don't have any hard feelings now. And I really, I just see it as a part of the journey too.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it too, like as I've, because there's a lot of this stuff that for me, like I obviously love the show, but you don't think about it. It's like, it's there hasn't really been something where we've willingly said, hi, we're gonna, put people through this experience for however long they can last. I mean, it's the type of stuff that people typically are doing forced, and things you read about in books from a long time ago, right? And so it is kind of interesting to think that, I mean, we just, in a lot of ways, just didn't even think to think about certain things, because, I mean, it was kind of paving a way in some sense, it seems like, with how extreme the experience really ends up being, mentally and emotionally and physically.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, it's an evolving show, and it's really authentic. The experience, there's no doubt about that. And it's a totally brand new thing for reality television to go that far in terms of its authenticity.
Yeah, it's
Of
kind of
you
scary.
really are just kind of dropped out there, and it really, I mean, I remember one of our producers, before we went out, saying something about like, well, even then, to that point where it was so much less extreme than it's gotten now, making some comment around, not, I can't even remember. I'm going to say it wrong, and it's going to frame them in something around that he was surprised nobody had died yet. And not that I mean, they're obviously taking as much steps as they can to make sure that doesn't happen, because that would obviously that would be the end of it. But, and just a disaster. But it is one of those experiences where you very likely could, I mean, it's like with this newest season with the grizzly bears, it's like, and that's what we sign up for. And that's actually a really pretty amazing piece of it. Is I wouldn't want to go on any other experience than that. I wouldn't want camera crews around and production hiding in the bushes. I want, and I think all of us who go on there want, a genuine, authentic experience of what is it like to get dropped in the middle of nowhere and have to survive off the land, with just, the tools in your bag. And they gave us that. So ultimately, just nothing but gratitude for them in that experience, no matter what hiccups I had coming back and whatnot.
Yeah. Well, we're kind of, I've taken quite a bit of your time, and you've shared some awesome experiences. And so I kind of want to start to transition and get you back to your family. But you have obviously your plant healing and plant medicine took a huge role in the show. It is something you've mentioned a few different times tonight so far, and obviously you're building a business and a livelihood around that. Can you talk about your plant medicine and how you've learned and what it means to you and where it comes from, and just kind of give us the whole rundown?
Yeah. So I mentioned a little bit, just having it integrated in the home growing up. I live in a place where it's really integrated into the community in a lot of ways. And for, most land-based communities or places, it tends to, which is often rural areas, it tends to be a part of the daily life, whether or not people are even conscious of it. But so I had, that in the household, and then when I moved back to the land when I was 21, I started getting more interested in it. And after I started growing food, I kind of started transitioning into growing and gathering herbs, and started crafting medicines, and started working with some teachers, and then it was when I applied to be on the show, I was in the process of opening up a business, a shop, and it all kind of came out of the same time. It was like a fall. I was working at a farm in California, and in that process, I really dream seeded my business, and also learned about the show, and through a friend, was friends with Lucas from season 1, and that's how I met Lucas, and then I ended up sending an email to the show, and then forgot about it, and then was opening up my business, and I basically was moving, and my business is a herbal apothecary storefront shop, and on the island where I live, so selling herbal medicines and kind of all sorts of witchy things, and so I was in the process of opening up that business when I got the call from the show, and it was basically a friend of mine moved to the island to run the business for me, and I opened the doors of the shop, and 12 days later left to go on the show.
Wow.
And which was pretty funny for my community because I couldn't tell them, but it was, it wasn't out of character to do something like that. And we just told them I was on an adventure. So my friend really helped kind of doula the shop into existence. And that first summer while I was gone, because it was winter in South America, and then after having the experience of the healing of the spider bites out there, and I knew very clearly if I could work with the plant medicine and see it through, it's not, there's time and place for plant medicine. It's, and I knew that if it was the time and place for it to be successful, that it would have a huge impact on viewers, on certainly a certain subsect of viewers, and it did, and it was such a gift, because for people to see it firsthand, to witness how plant medicine can be, incredibly effective, and it's it's a part of all our ancestry, all our history. That's the root of every system of medicine is land-based medicine, and Western medicine is no different. We've just moved into more of a synthetic form of it, but it's it's a part of all our stories. It's everybody's birthright to practice herbalism, and so that experience not only helped me deepen in my own understanding and knowledge, but it helped inspire others. And then from that, I was able to continue on with my business and education, and where I'm at now with my being on a progression of education and self-education, and working with different teachers, and having my business and working with people around health. I've been able to really expand my business into something that's taken its own shape. And one of the things that I do, I took on a business partner in 2020, which a very good friend and amazing herbalist, Mila, and she and I work together in the shop, and we run a herbal CSA, which is kind of one of our biggest focuses. It's like a 4-time-a-year subscription box of herbal medicines that are based around the seasons. So I've really shifted focus to working with seasonal medicine. And so we're in the 4th year of doing that. And it's just it's like a dream job for me, because I get to just be outside with the seasons and craft medicine based on what that season represents. And we write a little zine booklet that talks about the medicines and different tips and advice for deepening in with that season and how to use the medicines, and wanting it to be an educational tool. So that's like a big focus of the business now, as well as having the shop. And then Randy and I also opened up a little forest school that we've been doing teaching with as well, private courses and kids programs, and which was slowed a little bit by COVID, but so that's another outlet that I've gotten into with the plant medicine, is moving into more teaching as well. So so that's kind of the long and short.
Where can people find, do you have websites for your storefront, for your boxes, and for your school?
Yeah. So we just opened up and we only have, we just do a limited number of the boxes, and we just have, I think, maybe 30 subscriptions left. We just opened up last month our subscriptions for 2022. So we just have, as of today, just 30 boxes left or 30 subscriptions left. So if anybody's interested, it's a really great investment in your health and education around plant medicine.
Thankfully for me, I'm getting this news 2 weeks before everyone else does, so that's lucky for me.
Yeah. So there might still be a few left. We're gonna do the one thing we very much don't like doing is any sort of advertising. We don't like to spam people in any way, but I will plug it here. So if we don't do any big promotion before then, there might still be some left. But our apothecary is called North Sea Apothecary. So we're on Instagram at North Sea Apothecary or northseaapothecary.com. And Mila and I both work with, she's Finnish Palestinian. And we both, she moved here from Finland 12 years ago or so. And so we both work a lot with ancestral medicine. So she does a lot of Northern European, Palestinian medicine, and I do a lot of my ancestral, Western Isles type medicine. So we try to have a focus more on our ancestral medicines, and so and encourage people to explore their ancestry through, whether it's skills or medicine, stuff like that. So so northseaapothecary.com. And then I'm on Instagram too, that I use on and off, and that's at Callie Blue Heron. So those are kind of the main. And then our teaching is the Forest Folks. So that's theforestfolks.com.
Cool. And the teaching, are you focused more on school-age children? Do you do adult stuff? What all are you doing there?
We started the Forest Folks in late 2019, and then we're running classes with the community. So classes Randy and I were teaching. Randy's been a wilderness skills instructor at the Boulder Outdoor Survival School in Utah for 12 years. And so when he moved up here, he really wanted to have an outlet for teaching. He's a really amazing teacher. And I, have been getting into teaching. So we were doing a lot of just kind of skills courses, and then working with other community members to teach. But then we totally stopped during COVID. And then the following winter, we started up again doing a kids program. which is really amazing because kids were learning on Zoom at that time. And so it's just this beautiful reprieve for them to be able to be outside. And,
I bet.
and then, since then we were kind of just starting to dip our toes back in. So we've done some private courses and just trying to figure out how we can navigate that safely. And, we're, once we kind of get into a more of a groove with the baby and figuring out how we can do that, we want to do some more, probably start out with some private courses again. Yeah. And then hopefully get back into some group teaching again as well.
Cool. Well, I'll make sure that I link all of those in the show notes, and we'll get that in all of our social media stuff for the people that do see that. I'm just noticing that I should probably start paying attention to when you do something major in your life, because let's see, you started your storefront, and then a couple weeks later you're gone for a long time doing the Alone Experience, and then you and Randy started your school, and then a couple months later the whole world shuts down. And so your timing is impeccable. And so I'm going to start using you as my barometer on big things happening. So then the next time you release
big
something
things happening
new,
in my life, at least.
Well,
COVID, I guess, it's big for everybody.
Yeah. We'll just say you're a barometer of some sort. So I'm going to start taking note of that. But Callie, this has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for sharing your experiences and your outlook and your viewpoint on life and just everything that you've experienced. So before we wrap up, do you have, I guess, anything that you want to set the record straight on that we've talked about tonight, or is there anything that, any just last words you want to put out there before we wrap up?
No, I don't think so. I think, I've just really appreciated chatting with you. And I just want to encourage everybody to get outside and connect with the land and themselves, and apply for the Alone Show if you're up for it. I can say that, for me, I was not, a Jordan Jonas or a Callie Russell, but in terms of skill sets, so you don't have to be as, that learned to go out there and have an experience. A lot of it is around just, creativity, ingenuity, and being able to apply those skills. And not to say that Callie Russell and Jordan, their skill set, helped them get as far as they did, and they're amazing people. But my point is it's accessible to all sorts of people. So I want to encourage people to apply for the show if they are drawn to it, and you never know what can happen.
Yeah, that's great. And, I'm just going to say you're a great human being, because I would have said, just want to encourage all the people out there that think they know everything to apply for the show. So you're a great person, Callie. You are, you're a gem. You're delightful. So thank you again for your time and for your stories. And I'll let you get back to your sweet little family.
Thanks so much, Sam. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. And bye.
Bye.